Herzlich willkommen zu diesem Gespräch mit Malu Halassa, virtuell im Literaturhaus Zürich. I'm very happy to welcome Malu Halassa, joining us from London. And Edrit Hasler, he's going to be the moderator of the talk, and Lara Kurt is going to be the German voice reading a part of the German translation for this reading or event. Mutter, alle Schweine ist im Zürcher Elster Verlag erschienen, wurde aus dem Englischen übersetzt von Sabine Wolf. Es ist der erste Roman von Malu Halassa, and I was very much impressed by this novel, Mother of All Pigs, in many ways, especially by the main characters, by the liveliness with which they are painted. It was as if they spoke directly to me. And also I felt that I learned a lot about the complexity of everyday life and political life in Jordania. And I think this book lets us discover a world that nowadays we don't read about a lot, or if we do, it's usually in the headlines of newspapers and not in novels. And so I think this is a very, very important novel. And we have been looking very much forward to meeting Malu Halassa here in Zurich. We had to cancel the plans to do a reading a while ago for obvious reasons, but I'm glad there is Zoom, and I'm glad and happy that we have the opportunity to meet and to speak in this virtual space. Edrit Hasler wird das Gespräch mit Malu Halassa führen. Edrit Hasler ist Autor, ist Slam-Poet, er ist Vizepräsident des Verbands der Autoren der Schweiz und ab und zu moderierend im Literaturhaus zu Gast. Lara Kurt wird die deutsche Übersetzung lesen. Lara Kurt ist Schauspielerin im Theater und Film. Sie liest Hörbücher ein und auch sie ist öfters bei uns auf der Bühne als Stimme von AutorInnen, die ins Deutsche übersetzt sind. Und ich freue mich sehr nun, mehr zu hören, mehr zu erfahren. Und ja, bitte, Edrit Hasler.
Vielen Dank, Isabel. Auch von meiner Seite einen wunderschönen guten Abend. Das ist jetzt dieser Selbstbetrug, den wir im Theater immer machen. Für uns ist es noch morgen, aber ja, ich werde das Gespräch tatsächlich auf Englisch führen, auch die Einführung schon. Falls es jemand gibt, der sich daran stört, soll er oder sie das jetzt sagen. Kleiner Scherz. I'm proud and pleased to introduce Malu Halassa, Jordanian, Filipina American writer, editor, critic, and curator. Born in Oklahoma, raised in Ohio, and now based in London. She has a long history in dealing with themes and issues from the Middle East, focusing amongst others on sexuality and arts in the region. With Mother of All Pigs, she has published her first novel, at the same time a portrait of one Jordanian family in the midst of social and political upheaval, while as well a loving depiction of the Middle East with its complexities and paradoxa, where a millennia of history can all happen in the span of a day. Please welcome Malu Halassa.
Thank you very much.
Hi Malu. I hope you're doing okay.
I'm doing fine, thank you.
It's a bit of an odd situation for all of us, but we'll handle. And as you mentioned before, cultural events are extremely important for people in these trying times.
They take our mind off of this huge pandemic that's affecting all of our lives, and it kind of brings us, or for me, it brings me back to myself, who I am, and the passions that have always nourished me. So that's what I'm hoping for everybody, is that they can rediscover or go back to their passions that give them nourishment and a little bit of hope for the heart to continue on.
Your novel is to someone reading it from the West is probably a land map to one of the most confusing regions to us in the world, the Middle East, showing us all of its complexities and showing us also a war that we have kind of lost from our focus. We talk about the refugee crisis, but the war itself and the situation for people living there seems to really have been lost to us.
I think that's one of the things that, in my career as a writer, I'm always very curious about what is the vehicle, what kind of story will transmit the full experience of human life in the Middle East. That sounds quite grand. I really wanted to start with one family. I wanted a family saga. When I was writing, there were very few family sagas being written from the region. And I'm very curious about what we learn from the news as opposed to what do we learn from a story. And I wanted to, most of the writing that I've done about arts and culture from the Middle East has always been from celebrating culture, exploring culture, making a platform for culture, because I felt that in the culture of the arts in the Middle East, you learn something else. But with the fiction, you actually have a chance to not describe something to somebody, but actually get inside through a story. And that's, I was sort of curious if I would be able to do that with the kind of stories that through, you know, the novel came to me in an early trip when I was a young journalist in the Middle East. And I was always curious if I could convey not only my depth of emotion, but sort of the complexity of the life there to people who don't really have, they have an interest, but they've always seen the region through the prism of news.
Already with the choice of the family, you show one of the complexities of the region that often gets lost in translation, if I may say so. A Christian family living in Jordan, at the same time living quite a pragmatic side by side of different religions, while at the same time being confronted with rising religious tensions.
Well, it's true. I come from an Arab Christian, I come from an Orthodox, a Syrian Orthodox family. I'm not that religious, however, members of my family are. And I think it's true as Christian minorities in the region, they've always had to live with, you know, the Ottomans had the Millet system, but maybe the Ottomans weren't the best rulers. You know, there've always been this mosaic of religions, not really ethnicities, but religions in the Middle East, and they've lived side by side. And periodically, if you look at the early 1900s or 1948, when there was a lot of movement out of the region, I mean, we have, our family, we have Jordanians and Palestinian family members who are in Chile. So Christian families, Druze families, Muslim families, there's always been this influx in and out of the region. And sometimes, yes, tensions are very high. And the West, I think, always looks at these tensions as religious tensions or problems between Israel, Palestine. Somehow it's religious, but it's not really religious. I feel that it's more about scarcity of resources, scarcity of opportunity, lack of education, lack of opportunity. And if you look at the region in through those prisms, instead of thinking like, oh, this is ancient religious conflict, I think that you'll come to a more somehow more realistic understanding of the Middle East.
I completely agree with you. And coming from the Balkans myself, that's probably a very similar situation. While at the same time, it is also almost tangible to feel how religious tensions are being created right now. You're describing that in the novel yourself. There's social control which wasn't there before. It's quite scary.
I think that during times of conflict, especially when the Syrian war is less than 200, you know, it's very close. It's on the border, and you have refugees coming in and out, and you also have, not only at this time when the novel's taking place in the present of 2016, 2017, is that you also have armed men. Groups of armed men have been moving across the region for a long time now, and they still are. It might not be in the news as it was, but they still are. So you have all this, you have all this movement across in different kinds of people. And also they are, and at times of conflict, families pull in, they bring their daughters in. Everything becomes more conservative, whether you're Christian, Druze, whatever you are, because it's family culture in the region or in Jordan. So they don't want their daughters exposed. They don't want their children exposed. And families would act the same way in the West too, if the wars were as prevalent as they have been since 1948, you know, in the region.
there was a lot of hope for the region during the Islamic revolutions of 2011 and ongoing, and the characters in the novel reflected as well that there was a lot of hope that things were going to change, and they asked themselves constantly, where did it all go wrong? There was one conversation between Muna and Samira, if I remember correctly. Remember when the Syrian revolution first began, it was a peaceful moment. So why did it change? You do not really give an answer to that question in the novel, which is not a very optimistic outlook. My question would be, is there an answer to that?
Well, why didn't it change? It didn't change because the forces of the totalitarian forces and the militaristic and the industrial military complex that is in each of these dictatorships, or at times monarchies, or, you know, it was the protesters of 2011 were met with extreme violence and you know, they were attacked by the state. And I go back to Frantz Fanon, who was talking about that. When you go against the state comes at you with even more viciousness and firepower that the original people who criticize the state never have. Look at Algiers, that's what happened in 2011. However, yes, that did happen. And yet, young people, whether we're talking about young people in Syria, Jordan, Egypt, young people have continued with their activism. And that's, I think, more of what I was trying to show in the book, is that the landscape of the Middle East is weighted against voices who are calling for freedom, accountability, and democracy. It's weighted against those voices. And they're kind of out there on their own. They have to somehow survive and do what they want to do by themselves and make their own underground alliances. When I think of what's going on in Beirut now, you know, Beirut has suffered so much, and yet it was ineptitude and corruption that really got them in the port explosion. And the local activism of people there, whether feeding poor families, whether trying to get the city back on an even keel, the cleanup of the city, that's what's happened, I think, to the young activists. And in the novel, I wanted to show that the young people they had their own agency. That even though this whole system is weighted against you, even though you might be arrested for carrying material or newspapers, opposition newspapers, or political material that the state doesn't want you, or books that are banned, people are still trying to do something. They haven't given up. It's not all dire. And that's something that I wanted to try to communicate in the story of the novel.
It's interesting that you mentioned the state now, because the people in the novel, the main characters, especially the women, of course, seem to be under a constant state of threats, and they have to live in a way of trying to keep their secrets and trying to be always careful that no one finds out their true natures and desires. But it's not the state that actually threatens them. It's everyday people around them. It's neighbors, the sheikh. It's
culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's local. It's the local community and it's local culture, and that's the way it is, I think, for women under stress wherever they are, whether they're in New York and they're having problems, or they're in London, or they're in Zurich. I think that it's the local situation or the immediate family members that can apply the most pressure. I think, though, for the Middle East is that it is a patriarchal society, whether we're looking at Islam or we're looking at Christianity. And I think it's in the patriarchy that there's a deference to men, a deference to the possibilities that men have better jobs, what they can do, and what women cannot do. And I think that's a problem. And those scenarios that I write about in the novel are also scenarios that I've seen in my own family close up. I was a little different. You know, I was the daughter of a Jordanian man and a Filipino woman. And my father came from a very poor farming family, and my mother came from a very wealthy family. Somehow, this is the immigrant story. So, my sisters and I, being raised by our mother, we have a very different kind of protective shield around us in terms of what our traditional Jordanian or Middle Eastern family thought that we should be up to. So, but there are stories in my family where women were not given those opportunities, or they weren't allowed to have that platform or voice. And some of them are the older aunties, and some of them are still the younger women.
But those archetypes that you just described, those are exactly personified in the characters that you have in the novel, and these are quite horrifying realities at times. There is Fatma who from the moment that her parents are dead, wasn't allowed to leave the house anymore, going really through a prison existence, if you will. You have Layla, which who leads a secret life of sorts that is at times hinted at, but it is clear even in her role as a teacher, she needs to find strategies to take her own ideas, which seem quite progressive or too progressive for the small village she lives in, and unite them with the sort of conservative mindsets that her students confront her with. Those are horrifying realities.
Those are horrifying realities, but I think women face those sorts of contradictions in their lives all the time. And I think that when you talk about women in the region from the Middle East, you think like, oh, they have it even harder than other women. But I think women all over the world are under the same pressure. I think that whether your patriarchy is stated out in the open and you can see it right there, or it's sort of like pushed into the background, I think women are making those choices. And I also think that under severe conditions, women still live their lives. And I think that's the important point, is that women still live their lives, and some of them are very vocal and they're able to do their work and what they want to do in society. I mean, there are remarkable women in the region in terms of writing, in terms of activism, in terms of what's going on now, in terms of the groups that are still quite active for civil society and working on justice issues. And they're in cities and countries where sometimes their work is not appreciated by the powers that be or by their families, you know. And you know, I always found it interesting that for me that people who didn't know the region, they would assume that just because a woman wore a hijab or a niqab, that somehow she was silent or submissive. I mean, the women that I know from the region, they're very vocal. They're very vocal, they're very demanding, and they have very strong ideas. And it doesn't matter to me, or in my experience, it never really mattered how women dressed, you know, that they still have a lot of agency. And I think to deny them that, to say, well, they're this way, and not talk about the agency, or not talk about their strength, or how, you know, now because of the war in Syria, it's the women that are raising the families. The men have died. Or the men, I mean, so many thousands of men have disappeared into the jails. So, I mean, you have a country now that's pretty much run by women. So it's kind of interesting that we allow like a piece of clothing to stop us from really hearing their voices or looking beyond, you know. And I find that sort of interesting. So that was another thing that I wanted to show, was these forthright women. Sure, they have pressures. Sure, they're unhappy. It's a crux. The day is it's a crux moment. So everyone's kind of fraught and unhappy, but they still make their way, and they will make their way. And I think that's, for me, that was the important thing to show in the novel.
you also show that it's networks of women that are probably
Yeah.
one of the possible escape mechanisms. Samira, who finds her own identity by connecting with a group of Syrian refugees and becoming politically active through that. Is that a reality that we often do not see also from the Middle East? When you say
Definitely. I think that women's activism, political activism, we definitely don't see. And women have been I mean, one of the things that I did when I was doing research for the novel is I looked at Palestinian women's activism from 67 onwards, you know, I was very curious about the type of groups that Palestinian women were doing. And then I was meeting young Syrian women coming to London, and they were breaking into groups. And then there was also another group of people that weren't Syrian that were getting together, working for Syria. So that you had all these groups working. But I really found that there's a history of women's activism in the Middle East that's just never acknowledged, because they somehow don't think women are, you know, active, but women have been incredibly active. And it's that for Palestine and for Syria, it's the unspoken history. It's not really, I mean, you can find it in Palestine, you can find it in the academic journals. It's there, it's been documented. We've had very good academics look at Palestine and really live Palestine, and they're still living there, and they're still writing about this. With Syria, it's a little differently, but that's coming out. The women of Lebanon, the literary women of Lebanon who've been active like since the Civil War, they're very well documented. And I think we're going to look back at not 2011, but I think we're going to look back at this time, and there are going to be all these young women, activist women, in groups in Egypt, and because of the Sudanese revolution in Sudan. The women were very, very visible on the streets of Sudan. So it's kind of that we don't automatically think about this in the West, but it's there. And and also if you're looking at I don't know if you're familiar with the research of Shireen El-Feki, Sex in the Citadel. She's been doing these surveys of men and women in the region, country by country, you know, Lebanon, Palestine, Kuwait, and she's looking at sexual mores and how young families are, because now women in the Middle East are the ones that are getting the jobs. The men are not getting the jobs. The women are always the lower workforce, so they always get the jobs. They're always working. So the men, Palestinian men in Lebanon, Palestinian refugee men in Lebanon, they love their children. They'll do the laundry. But my goodness, they don't want to be seen hanging the laundry outside. There are these different things are changing in a way that we would notice if they were happening in our backyard in suburban America, you know, but it's happening over there. And first off, our understanding of the culture and the language is not so clear. And we're always kind of muddled by the religion, you know? So, but these other things are happening. It is 2011. Okay, 2011, it failed. Those Arab revolutions failed, but they set off something that's still going on. And that's why I refuse to give in to, I don't know, my older relatives' assessment of the Middle East, like, look at it, it's so violent, nothing's going on, they're terrible, they're stupid. No, it's much more complex and much more exciting than that, I think. And I'm trying, with the novel, I was trying to give my version of the Middle East that I've encountered, that I've seen, that I've been a part of, that I witnessed, that when I was going to Syria for a book that I did with Rana Salam, The Secret Life of Syrian Lingerie, I was going into the country by myself. And then they changed, they decided that they wouldn't accept American passports. So I remember one time I was at the border and I was taking a service, a shared taxi to Damascus from Lebanon. And I was a long time with the border guards because of my passport. And the women of southern Lebanon in the cab, they were Shia women. They didn't talk to me when I was in the cab. They would not let the cab driver leave me behind. No, we're not leaving that foreign woman at the border with those men that we don't trust. And it's very important. I wanted to show my experiences there, because I kind of felt that I wasn't reading about what I was seeing or what I was experiencing when I was with my family in Jordan.
If I may be so bold, you mirror the situation of the women in the Middle East also in the title character, the mother of all pigs, who is then exactly a thinking, intelligent, empathic animal, but she is isolated, right? She cannot go to such a net of solidarity. She is completely isolated, and as such is reduced to mere biological function. And even though the men around her treat her sort of kindly, even,
she's still a breeding machine.
She's a breeding machine and completely mechanical.
Completely mechanical. And yet, this pig takes pleasure when she digs in the earth. And yet this pig can, I don't know, yes, it's, someone asked me, they said, mother of all pigs, you're naming your novel after a pig, and the pig doesn't get that much. I mean, the pig is not the main character jumping through you. That's not who you meet in the beginning. And I guess the thing is that the pig has great strength. And she herself has an experience of the Middle East as the maligned, as the maligned figure, as the one that's kicked, as the one that's always used for breeding purposes. And yet, she still has her family around her. And yet, she still has epiphanies and understandings and light bulb moments. I guess the thing is that the pig is there for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that my uncle in the mountains of Jordan, when he came out of the army, he tried to raise pigs. And when I visited Jordan, I was never invited to the pig farm. However, my cousins, who are much younger than me, they remember going and playing with the piglets on the pig farm, and they also remember getting very sick. So it was, the pig also has a totemic value for my family culture too. Not just that it was there for the women, it was there for our family too.
To me, one of the maybe most shocking sentences in the whole novel was when we're talking about this mechanization of the female body, was the description of the famous 40 virgins that jihadist Sudai would then meet in the afterlife, that these are women who regenerate their hymens immediately after having sex. These gazelle-eyed women companions of the faithful are not, as promised, pure and untouched, just recyclable. This could have just as well been out of a totally dystopic science fiction novel, basically female sex slave clones in heaven.
But it's really weird. I mean, isn't it interesting what people like, I don't know, what people desire? It's the oddest thing to me, right? It's like really odd. Like the wealth of this world, the wealth of nature is the Garden of Eden. There's so much that we, even at this time of crisis and pandemic, the world is so rich and interesting. And yet this is the vision that somehow we're given. Like it seems like it's like a failure in imagination. I don't get that. So I guess that's one of the reasons I kind of make fun of it, or I prod, or I needle. I don't know. I needle
But
because I get mad.
I was about to say, when we talk about the men who appear in the novel, their lack of imagination is staggering, right? You have the brother who runs his marvelous emporium and who wants muses kind of on the side that, well, he would like it as well if women were more respected and had more rights, but well.
Oh, well.
And
Yeah.
that was such a characteristic a notion for the Middle East. I know Egypt quite well, and that is exactly how I've seen Egyptian men be around women, and both around their own women as well as around tourist women. It's just, well, that's just the way the world
That's
is.
how it is. That's the culture. And I remember when my parents lived in Kuwait, and I visited. I must have been like in my late 20s when I went to visit my father and mother there. And I remember talking to my mom about, what I saw there. And she said, well, that's their culture. You have to understand that's their culture. That's acceptable because it's acceptable to them. And perhaps we're coming into a time when that's their culture is not enough. It's not enough that's people's culture, or that's what they've grown up with. Especially now, if it's true that women are the main workforce, and that it's all changing quite radically, you can't have the person who's the main breadwinner be also maligned. It doesn't work like that. It's not how things work, and so I think that there are social changes that will overtake this situation. We like to think of these ancient places as, kind of chiseled in stone. Well, the young people have news for all of us. It's changing really rapidly. And we're going to have to try to keep up, and these places have been, when I think the thing about going back to 2011, the thing that really upset me is that in 2011, I started looking at the independence movements in the region and what countries became like good countries for their people. And the independence movement, when you think of Syria, didn't really help them that much. They had 4 years of independence, and then they had coups from the late 1940s onwards. We think about Egypt, you think about Jordan's been under this monarchy, and I think things are slowly changing there, but it's still the monarchy. But it's not, I don't know, it's just interesting that these things are going to change. It's not all chiseled in stone. And that's what I like to tell my father a lot. It's like, no, you're wrong. Get with the program.
It still surprises me that you sound almost hopeful. I mentioned before that the realities you're describing, especially for women, are horrifying, and both in reality as well as in your novel, and both now in our talk as well as in the novel. You never have an accusatory tone, even when you describe the most heinous of crimes. How do you manage that?
I guess I'm scathing, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if I should show how scathing I am, but I think that, what I'm writing about is quite serious and difficult. It's all of it's difficult. And yet I'm constantly talking to, I don't know, young women who run their own publishing companies in Beirut, or women who run dance companies in London, or a woman who was a TV producer in Doha, and now she's she's here, and it's like they're all young Arab women, and they have problems with their families. Yeah, they might even have problems with their husbands, but they are not having problems with their belief in social justice, and that they still think there's a way to work the system, that they can join people together, they can join up the dots, and they can make a difference. That's the thing that I find quite remarkable, is that the young Arab women I know, they're not lying down. They're not saying, oh, this is too much, this is against me. No, they're on the internet and WhatsApp groups, and they're roping in high profile figures, and they're getting money from them for their causes. And I think that that's, I mean, I admire that. I admire that. I admire their get up and go, but also that coming from the kind of families that they come from or the countries that they come from, that they're doing it. And I think that that's more the story, I think, of the Middle East. And perhaps when I was writing the novel, well, that story demanded its own kind of drama, chronology, bubbleness, you know? It's a bubbleness that when you tell a story, it has a beginning, middle, and end. But myself, in my real life, I'm very optimistic because of the people that I know. They surprise me. And not only do they surprise me, I learn from them. I'm nourished by them. And I think that's why I always go back to the Middle East.
Let's quickly talk of the pace of the novel, because you just brought me now to my probably last question as well. For someone who hasn't read the novel, this must sound like we're talking a book 1,500 pages that treats the story of 3 generations or more and thousands of years of history behind that. But when in fact, well, it actually does treat 3 generations, but it all takes place, the whole plot takes place in a day. And reading it, for me, it felt at times like a really high-paced action or crime novel. Like I read the thing in half a day. It was a furious read to me. Was that a conscious decision? It all takes place on a single Friday, when the plot is definitely enough for at least 20 years.
I think it's probably because I wanted to cover that historical aspect. Like, that's the thing when I'm in the Middle East, I always think that, I always feel like history rising up. Like, of course it's contemporary. Of course it's street culture, it's shabby, it's a lot's going on. It's, you know, but it's also very much, I feel the history of it, you know? And I think that it's sort of interesting to me that to write contemporary experience, but also to draw in the history, that I guess that's what makes the contemporary experience so sharp, is that it happens against this backdrop. And I really wanted to have that. I know there was a reason why I did it in one day. I for some reason, I can't remember it right away, but I remember that I was very wedded to that form. I felt that, well, no, it's got to happen in one day. No, you're not going to veer off and have like lifetimes. It all has to be kind of compressed. And that's why I think the characters are dense. They're dense. They feel all this emotion all the time. They're churning.
Again, as I said, to me, it was a furious read. Really, it did read like an action novel at times.
Wow. Okay.
It was a pleasure to have that, because most family sagas have a slowness that to me usually is too long. So.
Also, very, very quickly, because I know that we have to move, is that the family in Mother of All Pigs is a working class family. And one of the things that I've gotten kind of mad about the Middle East is that you see middle class life and a wealthy life. Those are the lives of Arabs that we know about. But we don't know about working class. And many of the families I know, and from my own experience in my own family, we're an immigrant family. We're a working family. And I think that was one of the things. Another thing is that in the novel, one of the main characters had a long history in the army, in the Jordanian army. All these countries, a lot of the main employment for men is the army or the military. And I also wanted to show that, not the sheikhs, not the guys shopping in the fine department stores in Beirut, but I wanted to show the people that I saw from my family.
Thank you so much for this talk. I think this would be probably the perfect moment, now that we've made everyone excited to hear from about the novel, to actually hear from the novel. We're going to have a reading by Lara Körte from the novel itself, but if we might be so bold as to ask you to start this off.
Thank you very much. Layla peers past the cologne bottles and carefully checks the mirror for any evidence of strain on her face. Gently massaging the tender spot above her right ear, she wonders how it is that whenever her husband drinks alcohol, she gets the headache. She is oblivious to the acidic smell of the toddler's soiled diapers rising from the hamper, or her older sons in their bedroom. There is only one thing she demands and fusses about each and every morning. She doesn't care how much water is left or where it comes from, the farm, one of those pirate tankers, or a damn hole in the ground, only that there is an ample supply available for her sole and immediate use. On days when she has to remind Mother Fadma that the tins in the bathroom are nearly empty, she can become loud and abusive. Using almost all of what's left in the largest remaining container, she washes her face, then brushes her medium-length brown hair before applying makeup. Behind a cigarette taken from a pack on the windowsill, she examines her reflection again, nodding in pained appreciation. She looks good, despite everything that conspires against her. Some women are physically drained after having too many children and never fully recover. But after each birth, Layla took rigorous precautions: the correct diet, makeup, and clothes. Her nails are manicured, her skin supple and soft. Discipline has always formed the core of her character. Her normally unbending demeanor gives the impression of someone firmly in control, no matter how she may actually be feeling. Turning from the mirror, she experiences a flash of pain, bright and sharp. A reminder or a warning? She opens a bottle of extra-strength aspirin, swallows 3 tablets for the last of the water from the container, and takes a final drag from the half-finished cigarette before grinding it into a smoldering ashtray.
Layla blickt über die Parfümflakons hinweg in den Spiegel und untersucht ihr Gesicht. Sorgsam nach Spuren von Stress. Sanft massiert sie die empfindliche Stelle über ihrem rechten Ohr und fragt sich, warum sie die Kopfschmerzen bekommt, wann immer ihr Ehemann trinkt. Der säuerliche Geruch, der aus den vollen Windeln im Wäschekorb strömt, kümmert sie gerade genauso wenig wie ihre beiden älteren Söhne in deren Zimmer. Morgens hat sie nur ein einziges Anliegen. Ihr ist egal, wie viel Wasser noch übrig ist oder woher es kommt. Von der Farm, aus einem dieser Banditenlaster oder aus einem verfluchten Erdloch. Sie will einfach nur eine ausreichend große Menge für ihren alleinigen und sofortigen Gebrauch. Wenn sie Mutter Fatma darauf hinweisen muss, dass die Kanister im Bad fast leer sind, kann sie laut und ausfallend werden. Das restliche Wasser aus dem größten Behälter braucht sie fast komplett auf, um sich das Gesicht zu waschen. Dann kämmt sie ihr halblanges braunes Haar und legt Make-up auf. Durch den Rauch einer Zigarette, die sie aus einer Schachtel auf dem Fensterbrett gezogen hat, mustert sie abermals ihr Spiegelbild und nickt zögerlich, aber anerkennend. Gut sieht sie aus. Trotz allem, was sich gegen sie verschworen hat. Manche Frauen sind von zu vielen Kindern körperlich ausgelaugt und erholen sich nie wieder vollständig. Doch Layla hat nach jeder Geburt strenge Maßnahmen getroffen und die richtige Ernährung, Schminke und Kleidung. Ihre Hände sind manikürt, ihre Haut ist geschmeidig und weich. Disziplin war schon immer der Kern ihres Charakters. Normalerweise wirkt ihre Bestimmtheit, als habe sie alles fest unter Kontrolle, unabhängig davon, wie es ihr tatsächlich gehen mag. Als sie sich vom Spiegel abwendet, durchzuckt sie ein Schmerz, hell und stechend. Erinnerung oder Warnung? Sie öffnet ein Fläschchen extra starkes Aspirin, schluckt 3 Tabletten mit dem Wasserrest aus dem Kanister, zieht ein letztes Mal an der halb aufgerauchten Zigarette und drückt sie in den qualmenden Aschenbecher. Mutter Fatma hat langjährige Übung und ist auf die fein abgestuften Blicke ihrer Schwiegertochter eingespielt. Sie sieht, ob Layla am Frühstückstisch allein sein möchte und verlässt dann die Küche ohne ein Wort oder eine weitere Überlegung. Fatma kommt ihrer Schwiegertochter nicht in die Quere. Schlimm genug, in Lailas Haus zu wohnen, aber obendrein müssen Fatma und ihre jüngste Tochter Samira auch noch von ihrem Stiefsohn Hussein finanziell unterstützt werden. Laila scheint sich heute Morgen Mühe zu geben. Sie füllt das Teeglas der alten Frau, bevor sie sich selbst eingießt und sich ihr am Tisch gegenüber setzt. Zwischen ihnen ein beeindruckendes Aufgebot an gekochten Eiern, Labern, Tomatenscheiben, Frühlingszwiebeln, grünen und schwarzen Oliven, getrocknetem Sata-Thymian, Olivenöl und Brot. Und, wie fandest du's? Nur selten sucht Fatma das Gespräch mit ihrer Schwiegertochter, doch seit ihr 22-jähriger Gast angekommen ist, ist sie unruhig. Munas Vater Abd ist der zweitälteste Sohn von Fatmas Schwester Najla. Als Fatma nach Najlas Tod Al-Jid heiratete, zog sie Abd und seine 5 Brüder zusammen mit ihren eigenen 5 Mädchen und 2 Jungen groß. Abds Weggang aus Jordanien vor 25 Jahren beschleunigte zwar den Zerfall von Fatmas unmittelbarer Familie, doch dafür machte die alte Mutter ihm keine Vorwürfe. Von Al-Jids 13 Kindern war er der Erste, der sich gegen 1000 Jahre Tradition stellte, indem er eine Ajnabi heiratete, eine Ausländerin. Unserem Teil der Familie sieht sie wohl eher nicht ähnlich, bemerkte Laila trocken. Gestern Abend, als Fatma Muna zum ersten Mal sah, platzte sie hervor. Wie eine Chinesin, worüber alle nervös lachten, auch Laila. Trotz der riesigen Land- und Wassermassen zwischen den beiden Ländern waren per Post, Telefon und am schlimmsten mündlich unschöne Geschichten durchgedrungen. Das Temperament von Munas ausländischer Mutter, die die Anzüge ihres Gatten in Fetzen schnitt und Geschirr im Wert einer ganzen Küche zerschlug, war schon vor langer Zeit in die sabasche Familiengeschichte eingeflossen. Die Berichte haben Mutter Fatma lediglich bestätigt, wie unwägbar Eheschließungen mit unbekannten, ungeprüften Außenseitern sind. Stell dir doch mal vor, empörte sich die alte Frau. Das Mädchen hätte ja mit ihrem Vater kommen können. Aber sie muss unbedingt alleine reisen, wo sich doch gerade die Zerbrecher quer durch Syrien und Irak schlagen. Leider nervt es, wie Mutter Fatma die Dschihadisten immer als Zerbrecher vom Wort Daesh bezeichnet. Scheinbar nur, um sie zu ärgern. Aber sie geht bewusst nicht darauf ein. Die Familie ihres Mannes interessiert sie in der Regel eher wenig. Die junge Frau an sich findet sie faszinierend. Ich habe Muna gefragt, ob sie einen Freund hat oder ob ihre Familie Pläne für ihre Verheiratung hat. Und weißt du, was sie gesagt hat? Laila stochert im Essen und wartet die Antwort ihrer Schwiegermutter nicht ab. Sie hat gesagt, das meinst du nicht ernst, oder? Am Abend zuvor erfüllte Laila eine solche Mischung aus Missbilligung und Neid, dass sie das Gespräch nicht fortführen konnte. Heute Morgen musste sie wieder daran denken und sie kann es noch immer kaum glauben. Nachträglich fügt sie hinzu, so ein Selbstbewusstsein, solche Freiheit. Sobald die Worte ausgesprochen sind, weiß sie, dass sie das Falsche gesagt hat. Da haben wir hier schon genug davon. Muss wohl ansteckend sein, meinst du nicht? Fatmas Häme ist nicht zu überhören. Doch eben jenes Thema, das die beiden peinlichst meiden, hat Laila gar nicht gemeint, obwohl es zugegebenermaßen seit einer Weile sie umtreibt. Du musst mit Samira sprechen, stellt Laila nüchtern fest. Schließlich bist du ihre Mutter. Ja, es ist immer gleich die Mutter schuld. Als wollte sie sich die Kehle durchschneiden, wischt sich die alte Frau lapidar mit der Hand unterm Kinn entlang. Aber eins sage ich dir, fügt sie unwirsch hinzu. Ich bin in dieser Familie nicht als Einzige schuld. Leider bereitet sich auf das Schlimmste vor und wappnet sich für ein frühmorgendliches Streitgespräch. Stattdessen verschafft ihre Schwiegermutter nun ungeniert ihrem Kummer Luft. Laila erscheint das untypisch, denn außer Starrsinn zeigt Fatma normalerweise keine Gefühle. Ich habe Hussein angefleht, Samira an ihre Pflichten zu erinnern, ihr einen Rat zu erteilen. Es stehen ihr Ruf und unserer auf dem Spiel. Sofort ändert sich Fatmas Stimmung und ihre Worte klingen wie flüssiges Blei. Aber er musste sich in letzter Zeit auf andere Dinge konzentrieren. In der Schlachterei ist Hussein bei der Fleischlagerung absolut gewissenhaft. Er besitzt 2 Kühlschränke, einen für erlaubtes Fleisch und einen anderen, sehr viel größeren, für verbotenes. Als Halal und Haram sind die Kühlschränke nicht gekennzeichnet. Selbst folgt er zwar keinen Ernährungsvorschriften aus religiösen Gründen, doch er möchte verantwortungsbewusst handeln, auch wenn seine Vorkehrungen nur ihm bewusst sind. Außer ein paar Innereien ist der Halal-Kühlschrank so gut wie leer. Alles frische Hammel- und Ziegenfleisch verkauft er direkt von den Fleischerhaken im Schaufenster. Der andere Kühlschrank ist randvoll, bereit für das Wochenende. Heute Abend wird Hussein im Schutz der Dunkelheit noch mehr Schinken und Würste holen. Doch zu Ladenschluss am Sonntag wird auch das letzte bisschen verkauft sein. Soweit genügend Wasser vorhanden ist, werden die Räume der tristen Schlachterei täglich sauber gespritzt. Aber häufig verstopft eine fettige Schmiere die Abflüsse und sie sondern einen unangenehm durchdringenden, fauligen Geruch ab. Hussein stellt den Gasbrenner an und setzt einen Topf Wasser auf. Im Hinterzimmer hört er Khaled, seinen Mitarbeiter, arbeiten. Der Junge murmelt ein Gebet. Kurz darauf scharren hektische Hufe über den Fliesenboden, dann erklingt ein Spritzgeräusch, das sich in kaum vernehmbares Gluckern auflöst, als Blut, satt und suppig, in einen verzinkten Eimer abfließt. Mehrere dumpfe Schläge, der Kopf und die Hufe werden abgetrennt. Dann ein Geräusch, als würde ein alter, fettiger Teppich entzwei gerissen. Khaled zieht die Haut ab. Mit einem flüssigen Klatschen quellen die Gedärme heraus, seidig und milchig. Hussein stellt sich vor, wie sein Gehilfe durch den Haufen wühlt, wie ein Hexer auf der Suche nach Weissagungen und die Delikatessen heraussucht, Leber, Nieren, Dünndarm. Mit ein paar schnellen, tiefen Atemzügen pustet der Junge die Lungen auf, die althergebrachte Methode, um die Gesundheit eines Tieres zu überprüfen. Der Gehilfe kehrt nach vorne in den Verkaufsraum zurück, legt den Schafskadaver auf die lange Holztheke, wischt seine blutigen Hände an der schmuddligen Schürze ab und grinst blöd seinen Chef an. Hussein ignoriert ihn und wählt aus der breiten Palette abgegriffener Werkzeuge an der Wand ein Hackebeil. Ein Tier zu zerlegen hat etwas zutiefst Befriedigendes. Jeder knochenschmetternde Hieb hat etwas unwiderruflich Endgültiges. Mit jedem Schwung des Hackebeils spürt Hussein, wie sich seine Stimmung verbessert. Bumm! Das bringt den jugendlichen Missetäter zur Einsicht über die Schändlichkeit seiner rücklichtzerschmetternden Sitten. Zack! Das ist für den Wasserlaster. Krach! Laila! Der nächste Hieb soll für Samira sein und all den Ärger, den sie ihn macht. Doch in letzter Minute überlegt Hussein es sich anders und erteilt den Schlag abermals als persönlichen Beitrag zum Kampf gegen die Jugendkriminalität. Er arbeitet methodisch, trennt Bein von Lende, Schenkel von Brust und lässt mit jedem Schlag seine Frustration heraus. Er wählt 2 schöne Keulen aus seinem Werk und hängt sie ins Schaufenster. Schon sammeln sich erste Fliegen auf den Fleischbergen, von denen Gelee-weiches Fett auf die Theke tropft. Plötzlich klingelt die Glocke über der Fliegengittertür und kündigt den ersten Kunden des Tages an. Hussein ringt sich ein einladendes Lächeln ab. »Frau Habasch, wie schön, Sie zu sehen. Was darf's heute sein?« »Wir hätten köstliches Lammfleisch.« Die Frau des Bürgermeisters ist eine der wichtigsten Personen der kleinen Stadt. Sie ist mit einem ihrer Vettern verheiratet und aus einer alten Familie, die, wie die Sabasens, ihre Abstammung bis zu einer Festungssiedlung im Süden des Landes zurückverfolgen kann. Wie andere Christen mussten ihre beiden Familien vor über 100 Jahren nach Norden fliehen. Die Folge eines Missverständnisses, das zu einem Religionskrieg ausgeartet war. Schließlich erreichten sie eine erdbebenzerstörte byzantinische Stadt und gründeten darauf ein Dorf, das wieder zu einer Stadt anwuchs. Diese gemeinsame Historie ist Hussein nützlich. Sie erleichtert ihm seine 2 wöchentlichen Besuche im Büro des Bürgermeisters mit sogenannten Häppchen, die jedoch substanzieller sind als die sonstigen kläglichen Zuwendungen an den Ortsvorsteher. Den finanziellen Aufwand dieser freundschaftlichen Beratungsgespräche betrachtet Hussein als unerlässliche Betriebsausgabe. Warum sollten er und sein Onkel Abu Satar die einzigen am Trog sein? Seine Geschenke an den Bürgermeister sind nur recht und billig. Niemand verlangt sie von ihm, doch der Umgang mit der Bürgermeistersfrau wird dadurch trotzdem nicht einfacher. Frau Habasch lehnt sein Angebot ab. Ich habe mir gedacht, dass Issa vielleicht gern ein Huhn zum Mittag hätte. Sie haben nicht zufällig noch eines hinten? Seit Frau Habasch einmal hat fallen lassen, dass sie nicht gerne auf den Markt geht, hält Hussein in einem kleinen Hühnerstall im Hinterhof etwas Geflügel. Auf dem Markt wie eine Bäuerin zu feilschen, empfindet sie als unter ihrer Würde. Sie kommt lieber zu Hussein und zahlt für das Privileg. Er ruft, Khaled, Jadje, und der Junge erscheint mit einem dicken, gesprenkelten Huhn im Arm. Hussein ist überrascht. Eben dieses Huhn hat Khaled besonders gern. Es ist das Beste. Der Schar, der Junge bevorzugt es und gibt ihm zusätzliches Futter. Doch vor Frau Habasch kann Hussein nichts sagen, und so nimmt er das dralle Huhn und dreht es für sie hin und her. Sie nickt zustimmend. Hussein gibt Khaled den Vogel zurück und sagt ihm, er solle ihn vorbereiten. Er mahnt den Jungen zur Eile. Asra! Mehr sich selbst als der Kundin zuliebe, die er als aufdringlich empfindet. Wahrscheinlich bestellt sie nur Huhn, damit durch das Rupfen Zeit zum Tratschen bleibt. Wie geht's der Familie? Sie inspiziert das Fleisch auf der Theke. Ich habe gehört, Ihre Nichte ist zu Besuch. Ich hoffe, sie ist nicht wie diese arabischen Hip-Hopper. Ganz und gar nicht. Muna ist eine wohlgesittete, junge Frau, erwidert Hussein, obwohl er sich da anhand seiner spärlichen Erinnerungen an gestern Abend nicht sicher sein kann. Ich freue mich darauf, Sie kennenzulernen. Ich könnte ihr gerne am Sonntag nach dem Gottesdienst die Mosaike zeigen. Ja, das würde ihr sicherlich große Freude bereiten. Er weiß schon, was als nächstes kommt. Hätten Sie vielleicht Lust, uns zu begleiten? Hussein hat schon vor langer Zeit jedwede religiöse Überzeugung aufgegeben. Seine Lebenserfahrungen haben es ihm unmöglich gemacht, weiter zu glauben. Trotzdem ging er früher noch der Form halber in die Kirche. Als sein Trinken, seine Enttäuschung und seine Scham zunahmen, ging er immer seltener. Das waren seine Gründe. Heute besteht seine Frau darauf, den Kindern zuliebe zu gehen, auch wenn es schwierig geworden ist. Manchmal glotzen und flüstern die Leute.
Thank you, Laura. It was wonderful hearing the novel in German.
Thank
It was
you.
really wonderful. And I could follow it. I could, even though
Great.
I didn't know exactly where, I could follow. I could, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Lara Körter, für diese tolle Lesung. Thank you very much, Malu Halassa, Edith Hasler, for this insightful discussion, this voice of hope with scathing in the background. Das ist das Buch Malu Halassa, Mutter aller Schweine, im Zürcher Elster Verlag erschienen, mit, wenn Sie es lesen werden, einem Familienstammbaum, der erlaubt, all die Figuren dann auch noch mitzuverfolgen. Den virtuellen Büchertisch macht heute der Travel Bookshop in Zürich, wo Sie das Buch bestellen können. Es werden gleich die Informationen dazu eingeblendet oder Sie kaufen es in Ihrer Lieblingsbuchhandlung. Es ist ein Buch, das man wunderbar auch verschenken kann. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und nun viel Vergnügen beim Lesen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Auf Wiedersehen.